Welcome to the InfoSec Insider podcast, brought to you by URM, the UK's leading information and cybersecurity specialists.
Hi, my name's Annie and I'm joined here today by Wayne Armstrong, who's one of our senior consultants here at URM. Welcome to another episode of InfoSec Insider. So today, Wayne and I are going to be talking about implementing an ISMS or an information security management system that's conformant to ISO 27001. So Wayne, my first question for you is, in your experience, what role does top management play in the success of an ISMS implementation?
It's a fairly significant role, to be honest, because one of the things that I have found over the years is that without that involvement of management and commitment by management, then it's difficult to get traction within an organization. We've probably all have heard of, the phrase leading from the top or leading by example and that kind of thing. And I think that's one of the reasons why management need to be committed to whatever it is they're trying to do with the ISMS, whatever the reasons are that an ISMS needs to be put in place. It's very rare that an ISMS will be successful if it doesn't have that buy-in from management. One of the other main reasons for that is around provision of resources. And obviously those resources can be all sorts of different things. It can be money, it can be technology, it can be people, it could be all sorts of different things. But without the buy-in from the people that control the budgets, etc., then you're not going to get very far. And also, sort of coming back to my first point, if they're not seen to be leading by example, then lots of other people in the organisation are just going to be sat there thinking, if they're not doing it, why should I do it, kind of thing.
So on the flip side of that, you've got the top management buy-in. How do you then encourage employees to take ownership of information security as part of their day-to-day responsibilities?
Yeah, so it's a fairly difficult obstacle to overcome, because what we're generally talking about, or not generally, but in some organizations that might not necessarily have considered security before and things like that, it may be difficult to get the message across around why information security is important and what the staff need to do and why it's important for them to be involved, etc. And so it's not something, if you're in that kind of situation, it's not something that's likely to change overnight, because we're sort of talking about changing changing ways of thinking and changing culture in an organization. So I think one of the main things, obviously, that an organization needs to invest in is training and awareness. So ensuring that they get the message across to everybody in a way that makes sense, and the content of that training material must include not only what those people need to do in order to follow policy and that kind of thing, but also the reasons why. What are the benefits of doing it? And if you can get that message across to people and advise them, around how they can help achieve what the organisation is trying to achieve by implementing an ISMS, then you'll be onto a winner, I guess, essentially. So training and awareness is probably the biggest thing, and it's something that you've got to keep doing. You can't just do once and sort of forget about it. It's something that you have to keep revisiting and sort of keep the message in the back of people's minds, so that it's always there. And eventually you'll get to the point where it becomes second nature for them to start thinking about security in all sorts of different processes that they might be undertaking in the business.
I suppose it's not just about having that one training session when you first start as a new joiner. It's about refreshing that information that you're absorbing.
That's a good point as well, in terms of refreshing the information, because you don't want it to become stale. You do have to stay on top of it and repeat it sort of annually, or even more often if you break it down into sort of more manageable chunks, etc. But keep it relevant. Things change, technology changes, the threats that organizations are facing are changing all the time. So change the training material around, make it relevant, and sort of ensure that it makes sense to people that are receiving it.
When it comes to documentation, policies, procedures, what approach should an organisation take when it comes to creating those policies and procedures for an ISMS?
Yeah, so I think one of the misconceptions around implementing an ISMS in the first place is that it's just an exercise in creating documentation. And I think international standards have come a long way. So, I mean, it did used to be like that, to be honest. But I think international standards have come a long way, and they've tried to go down the route of only requiring documentation that is useful, that's beneficial to the organization. So one thing that I would say is that organizations need to make sure that the documentation that they put in place is fit for purpose. So one of the reasons I say that is because there are a number of organizations out there that will provide sort of an ISMS in a box. So, you pay a fee or whatever, and they provide you with 100 different documents. And that's fine. It's a starting, but it should be seen as a starting point. So those documents, when you bring them in, shouldn't just be taken at face value and published. What you need to do is bring them in and tailor them to your organization. And it comes back around to what I was saying around the training and awareness. Keep it relevant and keep it up to date, etc. And it's the same with your documentation set. It needs to be relevant. It needs to be to the point. When you're doing that, when you're writing the documentation, it needs to be written in such a way that everybody's going to understand it. So steer away from the technological speak or the legal speak and that kind of thing. Or if you do have to include some elements of that, then define it within the document, etc. So keep it simple and straightforward, easy to understand. Don't make it over complex. Just have the documentation that's either required by ISO 27001, for example, or is beneficial to you as an organization, because there's no point writing documentation that's just going to sit on a shelf and not get used.
Finally, Wayne, what would be some of your top tips for implementing an ISMS?
I think obviously in the first place, you've got to have an understanding of why you're doing it. Most organizations have some kind of business driver. And so you need to have that picture clear in your mind as to what the benefit is of putting an ISMS in place in the first place. Now, obviously, we deal with lots of different types of organizations. Those organizations could be in the public sector, the private sector, it could be financial, it could be manufacturing, it could be all sorts of different things. And that might, so therefore the reason for implementing it could be things like legislation or regulations. It could be contractual requirements by your customers, etc. So you need to have it clear in your mind what the reason is for doing it. Once you've got that picture in your mind, I think the next thing is really moving on to a clear risk assessment, making sure that you understand what the risks are associated with those reasons for doing the ISMS in the first place. Yeah. So you identify those risks, and once you've identified the relevant risks, you can then be in an informed position to be able to choose what sorts of actions you need to take in order to mitigate those risks. I think it's also sort of moving on to onto a different tip, if you like. I think it's even from day one, or getting into the risk assessment and understanding, what the nature of the business is and why information security is important, etc. You need to involve everybody in the organization, be open and transparent, and take on board the considerations of not only senior leadership in the organization, but also everybody else. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the everybody else that are generally using all of the information in the organization. So they're probably in a really good position to tell you where the risks might be. They're using it in a particular way that might identify a risk that needs to be mitigated, etc. So involve them, and the more you involve them, the more they'll appreciate. I mean, coming back to the training thing, the more they'll appreciate why they're doing it. They'll feel involved. They're more likely to get on board because they've been involved in the process, etc. So it's all positive, and that leads on to probably probably the final tip, if I was to give you sort of three big tips, and that is around ensuring that information security processes are built into your business processes. It becomes embedded in the organization. And one of the ways that you can do that is through training and awareness and through involving people during the risk assessment and that kind of thing. So they all kind of lead into each other. And again, sort of embedding information security in business processes is not something that you're going to sort of fix overnight. It's going to be a process that evolves over time. So I don't think you should be looking at this as a sort of typical project that has a start, a middle, and an end, and then you move on to a different project. This is the sort of thing, because it's a management system. Management indicates that you're going to be doing it for forever. So one of the things that you should be looking at is not sort of to become perfect overnight, but to evolve your effectiveness over time. And eventually you will find that information security considerations end up being embedded, or they've been part of business, business as usual kind of thing. So I guess those would be the big things I would be considering when implementing an ISMS.
Yeah, absolutely. Building that information security aware culture, that's the most important thing at the end of the day, isn't it? Because that's what's going to make you, that's what creates the success of the ISMS. So
yeah, absolutely. And culture is absolutely the right word. If you can get everybody on board and switch the culture to thinking in a security positive manner, then you're going to be successful. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Wayne, for taking the time to talk to me today. And if anyone wants to learn a bit more about this subject, Wayne's written a really great blog on our website, urmconsulting.com, which is called Top Tips for Implementing an Effective ISO 27001 Information Security Management System. So please go check that out, and thanks very much for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could spare a moment to leave a rating or review at ratethispodcast.com/InfoSec Insider. To listen to more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Podbean.
Thank you for listening to URM's InfoSec Insider podcast. For more information, visit our website at urmconsulting.com.